Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and it's a real honor to have the chance to talk to you. I want to start things off by showing you 4 pictures and asking whether or not you can tell what is the key difference between the 4 people in those photos. Here they are. Again, take your time. Aside from the fact that only one of these 4 individuals seems to be wearing some sort of deceased animal on top of his head for some reason, what is the main difference between them? I'll give a quick description of each. Maybe that'll help. First, we have Mark Zuckerberg, who, as we all know, founded Facebook, dropped out of college, and consequently now runs most of our lives in here. Second is Donald Trump, one of the great real estate moguls of our time, and perhaps someday, if we're lucky, President of the United States. Third, you might not recognize. He's someone named Pandu Juma, who I know. He lives in Tanzania, in a small town called Pete, where they don't have all that much. They just got electricity last year, in fact. But from time to time, tourists from Italy pass through, and he's got this incredible desire to learn and managed to teach himself Italian in less than a year. Fourth, you probably also don't know her. She's named Dima Yanzum. She lives in Bhutan. And even though she's had a rough patch these past couple of years, she lost her husband, she has 2 small kids to care for, she can't find work. She has an incredible natural sense for business and how to bring all these new things to her country. Now, it might be tempting to look at them after hearing those descriptions and think the big difference between them is 2 of them are rich and 2 of them are poor. But I would argue that the difference is even more fundamental than that. It's opportunity. 2 of them had it and 2 of them didn't. And that simple notion is the central idea, the central insight behind microfinance, that what separates the poor from the rest of us is not necessarily work ethic or drive or even great ideas. It's access to opportunity and the ability to use that opportunity to better your own life. Now, I want to rewind a little bit. I'm sure everyone here has heard of microfinance, but you might not know all the details, so I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind it and where it came from. Microfinance arose largely as a counterpoint to the old idea of aid, the old model, which looked around the world very good-naturedly and said, there are a lot of people out there living in poverty. They don't have enough money. Let's give them some money. Now, that's not all that foreign a concept to most of us. I'm sure if we all stop for a moment, we can think of a recent time if you're walking down the street, either here in New York or somewhere else halfway around the world, and you came upon someone, a man or a woman, who was down and out, who didn't have any money and who was in really rough shape. And if you're like me, you probably thought to yourself, that's not right. What can I do to help? I want to tell you about a time when that happened to me a couple years ago and left a great impression on me. I was lucky enough to be going to Ethiopia for the first time. And like I always do anytime I'm traveling somewhere new, I was doing some research about the country, and I knew I'd be encountering some poverty there. But I saw that the exchange rate, the local currency is called the birr. I saw that 1 birr equaled about 7 or 8 cents. And I thought, to me, that's nothing. So here's what I'm going to do. When I get there, I'm going to exchange a bunch of money, carry birr around with me, and anyone who looks like they could use it, I'm going to hand it out to them. And so that's what I did. I was walking along one day, and I came across 2 boys who looked like they weren't in the healthiest condition. I talked to them for a little bit, and they said, do you have any way to help us? I said, sure. Here's a couple birr. And pretty soon, I was the Pied Piper of Ethiopia. I had 10, 20, 30 people behind me, 30 little kids, all laughing and giggling. I was handing out birr left and right. I was smiling, thinking I was doing something great. And just then, I heard a shout, "Hey!" from the other side of the road. And I looked over. I saw a guy looking upset. He was about my age. He started walking towards me. And he said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I started to explain. I said, they looked like they could use a little bit of help. I thought I'd give them some money. And he said, "Okay, I understand, but I want to ask you, please don't." And I was confused at first. I thought I was doing something to help. And what he said to me was, one of the kids that you just gave money to is my brother. Now, I've had this talk with him before, but one of our cousins is studying engineering right now. He's learning, and he's about to get a great job. And that's how he's going to build his future, through knowledge and through work. And my brother and all the other kids in this town right now, what they do is beg for money. And I want them to think of our cousin and to think, that's the way to build a better future for yourself, not by begging, but by working. And to me, that was incredibly powerful. It was startling in a way. And that idea is what attracted me to microfinance. I thought to myself, instead of having aid, instead of having handouts, we can do loans. Instead of begging, hard work. And the idea behind microfinance was that by making those financial tools available to even the poor, they'd be able to improve their lives. That all sounds good so far, right? So Imagine that's all you knew about microfinance. Let's say you were designing an organization from the ground up. What would you do? You'd probably want to know a bit more about what businesses people planned on starting. You'd want to know, could they be successful? Could they be profitable in those areas? You want to get to know your borrowers, your clients. You'd want to know whether or not they had the tools they needed to succeed, noting that a lot of them probably didn't have the same education you or I have. You'd probably think to yourself, maybe I'll give them some skills, some training. Third, because we're talking about loans, you'd also want to set interest rates. Now, because we're dealing with fairly poor people, you'd probably want to set them at something affordable for them. Just as a reference point in this country, if you were to walk into a bank and ask for a loan, you'd probably hear a number for the interest rate about 6 or 7%. And then last, if you were looking at things really big picture, what you would say was that in this country, when we start a business, we have all sorts of advantages, protections like bankruptcy laws, which make sure that if the business goes sour, we don't lose everything we own. Advantages like social services, where if you're in a real rough patch, what you have always is a place that you can go for a hot meal, or a place for a night to sleep. And noticing that people in a lot of other countries don't have that, you might try to extend some of those same benefits. So that's what a lot of us think microfinance is. And as a result, that's why it's gotten so much support over these past couple of years. It's become a golden word where anyone who says, I'm involved in microfinance, might as well have a halo around their heads. You think they're doing something great and really helping people. Unfortunately, the reality has been very different. And here's what's happened instead. Here are a couple headlines here, and anyone who's been following microfinance the past few years knows there's big problems. You see things like embezzlement, things like microfinance bank executives making off with big paydays while their borrowers are having interest rates something like 49%, 105% a year, 129% a year. What you have, even on top here, you can see in India, in parts of India, microfinance has been outlawed. It's illegal now, because it led to a wave of suicides. People who would rather take their own life than deal with the threats that were being made by some banks in order to recoup their money. People leaving their families, abandoning their villages just to escape this kind of coercion and intimidation. You have cases where most microfinance banks, when someone can't repay, in order to recoup some of their money, they seize that person's assets, the very meager things they own, meager possessions, a small plot of land, maybe a few animals, maybe an old TV set. That's all gone. What that adds up to, all in all, is that too many people, too many microfinance banks that got into the business in the first place to try to help people and to try to improve the lives of their entrepreneurs are, to be very blunt, helping to ruin them. And this is happening all over the world right now. So the central question facing the microfinance industry then is the same one that I'll put to you today. That is, if your ultimate goal is to really help people build better lives and succeed, would you want to give them worse terms than the ones that you or I, with all of our advantages, all the protections we talked about, education? Would you want to give them worse terms than the ones that we can get? Or would you want to give them a better deal? A lot of you have probably heard of Muhammad Yunus. He's an economist from Bangladesh. He won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. And he was once asked, after he started Grameen Bank, one of the first microfinance organizations, he was asked, how is it that you decided how to set up the bank and set the policies? And what he said was, it's actually quite simple. What we did was look at the big commercial banks, and we decided to do the opposite. So whereas the big banks would only lend to the rich, we decided we would only lend to the poor. The big banks would only set up branches in urban areas because it's more profitable. We would only set up branches in rural areas. The big banks made customers come to them. We would bring the bank to the customers. Now, I work with a small organization called 50/50, and what we're trying to do is to address some of the problems that we saw here. And we're doing that in a way that almost echoes what Muhammad Yunus said. But instead of looking at the big banks, we're looking at all these other microfinance organizations that are having problems and contributing to the problems. And we're doing the opposite. Instead of setting high interest rates, which bring the bank's profits but leave the borrowers with such high payments that they can't make them, we're setting interest rates at 0%. And we're going one beyond that. We're making sure that people who really need it, people who are starting from a pretty tough spot, are getting some advantage beyond that, and we're making half of the amount that they need to borrow in order to start their business a grant, no requirement of repayment. Where most banks are so focused on growing that they don't have time to get to know each individual entrepreneur and help them, we're slowing things down a bit, and we're making sure that no matter what the industry that they're entering, our entrepreneurs have the skills, the training, and the access to markets they need. And the last thing, whereas most banks, as we saw, require collateral, meaning that they have things they can confiscate at the end of the day if you can't make your repayments. We're taking people on their word that they're going to repay. And so far it's worked out well. We're trusting that people who get involved in this thing take it seriously and want to improve their lives. And we're operating on the philosophy that no one who signs up with us should end up worse off at the end of the day than when they started. Now, for all this to work, it requires taking a real interest in what entrepreneurs are doing and sometimes coming up with creative and new ideas for how they can earn income. Before I told you about Pandu in Tanzania. What you see on the side here are some photos of caterpillars and pupa. What he's doing is helping people in his village to raise butterflies that they can then sell to tourist exhibitions, to zoos, even lately to wedding planners who have a lot of brides and grooms that want a flock of butterflies released at the moment they're getting married. You can see over here some sponges. There are a lot of coastal communities that have a tough time getting by now because fish populations are depleted. So what they can do instead is to cultivate sponges just off the shore and then sell those to art supplies, to beauty and cosmetic companies. But not everything has to be so exotic. I told you before about Dima in Bhutan. What she's doing is as simple a business as there is. She realized that a lot of products that are available in India aren't available in Bhutan. So she's taking the bus to the Indian border, throwing a bunch of goods on top, and then selling them throughout the country. On the island of Pemba, also in Tanzania, we learned that there's not enough milk in the marketplace, that if you want to get milk, you've got to get there before noon or it's all going to be sold out. And after studying it more, we learned it's just a simple problem of supply and demand. So we helped 7 entrepreneurs start a dairy farm that's right now making milk for the local market. For all this to work, we're relying on a fairly simple proposition, and it's this. There are enough people out there, people like you and people like me, who are more interested in using microfinance to really help people than to make profits. You know, we talked today, and the theme of today's gathering is moving beyond Z. What that means for me is realizing that what you're presented with is not necessarily all that's out there. That what is may be quite a different thing than what could be. I want to close out today with 2 requests, actually, from you. The next time that you're walking down the street, wherever it is in the world, and you come across that same situation, you come across someone who's really down and out, and you start doubting whether or not it's worth helping them out, given all the depressing news that's out there, to listen to yourself, because the answer to the question of what can we do to help is quite a lot, actually. But the second thing is that once you make that decision to get involved, whether it's with microfinance or any other organization out there, what I want you to do is your homework, to research what the organization says they do, to verify that what they say they do is what actually happens in practice, and to hold them to very high standards. If they're claiming to help the poor, put yourself in that situation. And if they're offering a deal to the poor that you yourself wouldn't touch in 100 years, keep moving and find another organization to work with. You know, I mentioned at the beginning that I was a big supporter of microfinance, and I still am. And I think those of us who thought it has the power to do a lot of good in this world aren't wrong. But what we need to do is to reprioritize and making sure that the most important thing at the end of the day is not profits, but helping the people that we agree to work with have a better future and a brighter tomorrow. Thank you.